and welcome to another evening of frank conversation here on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Maokpe Ogun Yusuf. For a few weeks now, we have focused on Nigeria's democratic journey, and our guests, though a bit disappointed on the outcome so far, are still very optimistic on the journey ahead. Tonight, we expand our conversation beyond our shores to the West Africa sub-region, where, interestingly, it's been a mixed bag. Coups in a number of our West African neighbors have set the region back somewhat, but there have been success stories in the conduct of peaceful elections in both Liberia and Senegal. Interestingly, all of these have come at a time when our President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is now chairman of the ECOWAS Heads of States and Governments, a position he assumed on the 9th of July last year. How would we say he's fared in his 1 year as chairman? What needs to be done to return African countries on the path of democracy that truly works for the greater good of the larger majority? Our guest tonight is Austin Aigbe, the Advocacy and ECOWAS Liaison Lead for the Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS. Mr. Aigbe, welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you very much.
Well, I have become quite intrigued by conversations around democracy because of all the forms of government that people can choose, to organize themselves around. We have chosen democracy. But so far, when you look at West African countries and maybe African countries in general, and the fact that, we have chosen democracy and the outcomes that we're experiencing as a result of this, it does appear that democracy seems to be on the back pedal, on the back foot of delivering the outcomes that people desire. Why is this the situation?
First, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting us for this conversation. You're correct. We are facing right now what we call democratic recession. Just as you have the economy in recession, democracy in West Africa specifically is undergoing some form of backsliding. Progress that West African region has made over time. Don't forget, let me quickly put on a record, that our region, the West Africa region, used to be the best in Africa. Democracy thrived well, but right now we are gradually back to the conversation of the 90s, where it was back-to-back coup. But again...
Yeah, you just mentioned coup, because I was about to ask, what are the indices you're using to measure that? Is it in terms of coup, or is it in terms of the economic prosperity and, the general welfare of those whose governments are still in a democratic regime?
So if you check the early... Let's take, for example, the return of democracy in Nigeria in 1999, or the Fourth Republic. People argue that the days of military junta and all of the so-called advancement in our economy that we ought to have enjoyed was a bit of a challenge during the military regime. That now you have a civil rule and democracy, you expect some form of progression. The challenge, therefore, is that over time, whether it's in Ghana or it's in Sierra Leone or Senegal, over time, there seems to be some level of comfort within this civil authority, who have then literally put off the civilian uniform and wore some kind of invisible military uniform. What I'm talking about, not just be in Nigeria alone. If you look elsewhere, what's happening in our client is that democracy in West Africa at some point used to be very unique. Unique because there was some form of an ECOWAS who used to pretend, kind of enforcing some rules, ensuring that one of the principles of democracy is elections. You say, how do you check a democratic setting? You say, are they conducting elections? Is the election free and fair? Is the election of integrity? So you then begin to look at certain benchmark. Your ability to triangulate, your ability to speak to another, can we involve in business? Gradually, the economy grows. But when people are cracked down on, it also has impact on the economy. Because when I know that I don't have freedom in this country, I'm likely going to get out. All my investment in this country may likely go down.
It's interesting that you've mentioned dissent. So right now, I would first of all divide the countries we're looking at in the West African sub-region into two. Those who are still practicing a democracy. They have periodic elections. They, go to the polls. They elect their own leaders. There is a free media, etc. Sort of people. Yeah. And then where we now have military juntas in place, where the military have taken over. For the countries that are actually still practicing a democracy, Why do you think many of their citizens, feel very disenchanted with what is currently going on within them?
So permit me, I will add a third layer. There's a military coup. There's a constitutional coup.
There's also that one. Because, I mean, Togo now, for instance, just did a constitutional amendment that has not gone down well.
Exactly.
So, and these countries are practicing a democracy.
They say they practice democracy. So first is that there's a conversation ongoing, and there are a couple of messages that are spreading on social media. Looking at Burkina Faso, people say, oh, the Burkina Faso president does not earn higher salary. He maintains his salary and he has increased worker salary, particularly during the time of the hit about minimum wage. Look at Burkina Faso, the military there. People were passing wrong information. In Burkina Faso, as I speak to you, if you make commentaries that is anti the military regime, you will pay for it. A good example is that they said among other things that brought the military is terrorism. I mean, violence in those areas, particularly Sahel area, where people are killed almost on a daily basis. The military came in an attempt to stop those. Now, Burkina Faso is faced today, even with the African Corps help, the Wagner Group, the Russian alliance, Burkina Faso, just a few days ago, about 230 persons were killed in Burkina Faso. Terrorist attack. I'm not saying terrorist attack is not happening in Nigeria. I mean, that you expect that this military regime would have fenced out those terrorists. Do you know that as a young person, specifically, let me just go specific. Someone said, but we thought the military was going to go against the terrorism. What's still happening? They called him and gave him gun to go and fight terrorism. They equip him. So, okay, you are blaming us, right? Now take the gun, take the AK-47, go to the area, ensure you deal with them. Will that happen in democracy? We are in this country, we talk about government, we talk about military. In fact, the chief of defense staff, I can look at his face and say, you are not doing enough. And he will explain to me what they are doing. That's a democracy. That's why I use the word that democracy is not just about the economic benefit. You have to be free first. In Niger, people went on the street trying to pull down the flags of France. Of course, I don't want to go into the France Afrique and all of the issue with France, but they were happy, getting excited. As I speak to you now, the people are already disenchanted. In Guinea-Conakry, the same thing happened. The day the military took over, the streets of the city was agog. 1 year after, just 1 year, the military who came to fight corruption have been involved in corruption. In Niger, after the Ibeka's election of 2018, and all of the things that happened with election integrity and all of that brought in the military in 2020, Mali, go to Burkina Faso. In fact, Burkina Faso is almost like a no-go area. The sufferings, the hardship in Mali is worse than what people will tell you in Nigeria, these 25 years of democracy. I agree too that when we talk about democracy in Nigeria or civil rule, people will say, don't call it democracy, call it civil rule, whatever name you call it, that we have a freedom to speak, freedom to engage, freedom to ask our government questions, freedom to also elect them. You may not agree with their elections, but you have an opportunity to engage and cast that vote. Those are fundamental. Nigeria, we may not be where we want to be. I agree, but we are not where we ought to be if we're in the military regime. Most folks would have been arrested. Just recently, a journalist was arrested, and because of the shout, channels and everybody shouted, they were forced to release him. In the military, decree number 2 will not release him. You will not even know where he is. In Burkina Faso, one of our fellows, one of our members, just dropped from the airport. From the airport, they took him straight to the state.
But some of these things are still happening in democracies. Austin, some of these things that you just enumerated only recently, I think another sister, NGO, Serap, held a conversation around dissent and protecting and upholding the rights of citizens to dissent, because it would appear that some of these rights are being cracked down upon, even in countries that say that they are democratic. So if that
you
is...
see, Serap is able to do that because it has freedom to do it. You can't do that in Burkina Faso.
Yeah, but in the countries that say that, they're doing it. Because you have just talked about a backsliding of democracy.
Yes.
In the countries that say that they're practicing it. That it's not just about the coups that we're seeing across the country. And something is even causing the coups in the first instance. Because if citizens were experiencing this democracy that had been robustly, experienced in the West African region, why would anybody happily welcome a coup?
Exactly. This is whether this is right or wrong. It's because of the backsliding of democracy. It's because of the challenge with democracy today. My colleague will always say that what is happening now is more like a COVID-19 democracy. It's here with us. It's somehow you have to manage it. We have the resilience to keep democracy on is what we are going through, and that's why we're having this conversation. I agree that if you are living well, why we're going to be talking about military coup? Well, if the system works, and check all the military intervention, they will tell you, they will list all the ills of democracy, and that's why we are telling ECOWAS, for instance, ECOWAS, upscale your game. One of the accusations, like you said, unconstitutional change of government. Of course, you can take it on two routes, the military and also within elected officials. There's a study that one center in the United States conducted, whether military regime, if you put side by side military regime and the democracy, which one is better? And the data over a long period of time, trying to pin in, interrogate those data, eventually discover that no matter what, democracy outcome is still better than the military. Military will always come, try to do things quickly, as we have seen also in Nigeria. And after a while, they become worse than the same thing they once fought.
Very big questions. I'm just wondering, you've mentioned colonial influences, and I do not know how strongly you think that those have influenced the kind of democracy that we are witnessing in the West African region. What sort of influence do you think that with the West Africa's colonial history has had in playing in what is currently happening?
I could say that with Francophone countries, with the influence of particularly France, who dictate virtually everything. And that is why I said a few minutes ago that I don't want to go to the Franc-Afrique narrative, because you literally will get angry when France is interested, certain things is allowed, whereas if France is not interested, there's a back channel and all of that. So, but in most of the Anglophone countries, whether it's Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, the colonial influence, we shouldn't be talking about colonial influence now. It's like, in one of my pieces I wrote some years ago, I talked about how we continue to blame history when we are supposed to be rewriting stories. The truth of the matter is, democracy, the folks who are playing the democracy today, is like Animal Farm. We are all equal. But some of us are more equal than others. And the shoe that the white man wore, they simply took the shoe and stepped their foot on it, and they are using the same style. Check everybody who came into the electoral system of today. They tell you all the things they wanted to do. They were going to improve this. They were going to address this. The military will not promise anything. They take it, and then they start doing it. Because they didn't promise anything, you are going to see what they are doing as very fantastic until such a time where maybe they start to also backslide. But for democracy, you are going to get to a point where the person is going to come up with a platform, a manifesto. I'm going to do XYZ. I'm going to engage in this. In fact, Afrobarometer report, Afrobarometer is like a data agency in Africa. Their report suggests that more citizens, not elected officials, not politicians, more citizens prefer democracy. They reject one-party system. They reject military rule. They reject authoritarian system. They prefer democracy. Why? Largely because of freedom. And freedom in Matassin work. Freedom is development. When you are free, you can develop. So there are a lot of work. Even Paul Farmer in his work on development talked about freedom. That with freedom, you are able to access your dreams. But when you are incapacitated, your dreams can never be realized. Would
you say those in China incapacitated, for instance?
Those in China, that's a very fantastic question, because I've had to study China's communal system where, where there's some kind of decent voice and all. So China is practicing its own style of democracy. Again, you were talking about style of democracy because there's election at some point, and there's an historical narrative to China. China is an homegrown development country. Today, China is selling out what it has grown internally out to the world. But they realize that if the people are happy, they are unlikely to engage with government. If you have all your infrastructure in place, China is a model right now for infrastructural development, for food production, for everything. AI, they are the new world of AI.
Is a problem with the adoption of the kind of democracy that we have chosen, because people have started talking about the Western style democracy. Former President Olusegun Obasanjo has been talking about a homegrown democracy, etc. Is it something that we really need to give some thought to as to what exactly will work for us?
You see, I like what's happening in Sierra Leone, for instance. In the parliament of Sierra Leone, there are traditional rulers represented. In this...
Traditional rulers?
Yes. In the parliament of Sierra Leone, there are about 12 slots reserved for traditional institutions. In Nigeria, you may not like the traditional institution, but these were the institutions that ruled the system before. So we abandoned them and then created a new system who now lord it over everybody. I'm not asking us to go that route. What people need is they want to eat. They want economy to be okay. When the system is working effectively, that's what democracy ought to provide, because that's essentially democracy. The choice of people. When election is free, fair, and credible, when institutions are strong, but because these folks are afraid of election, not that they are afraid of election, they don't have a second address. Again, back to Obasanjo. Obasanjo will tell you about a second address. As one contesting election, what's your alternative? What's your other things you're doing? And the question I asked back Obasanjo some years ago, so what's your own second address? The second address for him was his farm. Oh, second address means you must have another thing you're doing, so that when your presidency is over, you get back to your second address. But most of these leaders of Africa don't have second address, so that's why they changed their constitution over time just to remain in office. However, if changing the constitution and perpetuating themselves in office is impacting on the citizens positively, by now, most countries of West Africa would have been thinking about changing constitution. That two-term, that's what we are promoting two-term, and we are asking ECOWAS right now to put in their protocol two-term for presidential term limits. Let it be enforced in this region. So leaders can go on the verge. But when you go on the verge, you don't know what else to do. Let someone else come in after 4 years or after 8 years who can change the trajectory. But when you insist on continuing because you feel that the presidency is now a monarchy, then change it to a traditional institution. So we know that you are now a traditional leader. You are not it's not democracy. Democracy has tenets. It allows for leadership change so that new ideas can come in, new philosophy can come in, even in businesses that want to grow. At some point in the leadership architecture of any business that want to grow, the leader must step aside. New ideas, new philosophy comes in. It may be by the side, he or she may be by the side, providing some ideas or some historical knowledge to move the organization, whether it's business, whether it's political, whether it's in economy, whatever it is. Leaders must get to a point and move, and we are advocating for a two-term limit.
I'm just wondering, looking at the fact that all of these schools that happened in Mali, one in Niger, happened just as President Tinubu was assuming office, not only as Nigeria's president, but also taking the mantle as chairman of ECOWAS, heads of states and governments. I don't know, how would you say that he has been able to bring some stability to the region? We saw the initial aggression, the initial strong statements that ECOWAS issued in the wake of these coups, and people feared that there was going to be some mobilization, some military mobilization, which a number of people feared was going to be ill-advised, assuming it were to happen. But given the fact that ECOWAS has now soft-pedaled somewhat, taken the path of dialogue, is it really having the desired effect to get these countries back on the path of democratic rule, so to speak?
So, for the strategy of ECOWAS, without trying to exonerate the president, it would have been advised to do it. of course, it won't take the decision unilaterally. Don't forget that they are friends, because these are heads of state. Their friends are the ones that have been removed. So they want to do everything to get that friend of theirs from those countries back. There used to be what they call ECOMOG in this West Africa, that particularly during the time of General Sani Abacha. When there are crises in another country, you see the deployment of Nigeria. There was a strong leadership that Nigeria provided at that time. So Nigeria till today is still being looked at as the leader of West Africa, of course, in Africa. But the challenge is, over time, Nigeria's leadership has also backslided. You would have also heard when President Tinubu tried to make those, and people say, no, calm down. Even your own election, there are concerns at home. So there's a way, if you that want to enforce democracy in another country, and there are crises of democracy in your own country, it sends a wrong signal. So to be able to lead an ECOWAS, and that's what I think President Tinubu should do, provide the Nigerian leadership. And what does the Nigerian leadership mean? Leadership in economy, leadership in politics, leadership in business, leadership that when countries of West Africa are looking for solutions, it is coming from Nigeria. Then when Nigerians speak, they will budge. But in this case, the Niger president say, okay, if you want to send them here, and you know what would have happened sincerely, it would have turned to an anarchist situation, because Niger and Nigeria is literally one country. If it hadn't been the invisible divide of the British that drew that boundary, these are people that have lived together pre-colonial rule. So they understand each other, even though the line has been drawn that you're on this side, we're on this side. And that was the major reason. But if he wanted to do it, it didn't consult. It didn't consolidate on the consultation. It went ahead to the last C. Conflict resolution required the triple C. Consultation, consolidation before confrontation. That it will be obvious to everybody that he has consulted. Call these guys. What is the issue? Okay, let's dialogue. Okay, we don't want, okay, no problem. All right, what is the route? Okay, give us a plan. That's what ECOWAS usually do. Give us a plan of your transition. And all of the plan they submitted to ECOWAS, whether in Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, they've also backslided on those plans. Mali said before we would have been thinking about election in Mali this year, but right now we may be thinking about election in 4 years' time, because they are no longer. I don't want to use the word afraid of Nigeria, but that's exactly what I meant. Let
us also focus on some of the countries where things have gone right, and I think Senegal, provides prime example of that. Liberia too, conducted its own independent elections by itself for the very first time. It's the first time that the UN has not intervened in helping it conduct elections, and they did pretty well, So how can we ensure that these countries that are still showing what democracy should be about, it should be about the people's choice, freedom to express what it is that they want to express, especially at the polls?
Fantastic. That's sincere, with all due respect, for hope, for democratic hope in the sub-region. We're actually looking at those two countries, Liberia and Senegal. Liberia, because Goodluck Jonathan did a resemblance, or Goodluck Jonathan actually did the first one, by allowing an electoral system to run its course. If you lose, it means that people don't want you. Like you said, in the Liberia election, the last election, it was clear that George Weah will lose the election. And ordinarily, if it was another country, they will find a way for the election not to hold, or they will manipulate it and cause some level of violence. You don't want to take Liberia to the kind of civil war where lives were lost because of one man's interest, one man's political interest. George Weah woke up in the morning and said, well, man, if I win, fine. If I lose, so be it. Sincerely, in that election, which is adjourned to have been, in fact, like you said, credible, with all due respect. And George Weah worked with the new president, Joseph Boakai, in his transition to ensure that Liberia was on the course of good action. The case is not just similar to Senegal. Senegal is so unique on its own because they would have been democratic backsliding, real one. Because we would have had the president perpetuating himself until December the 15th. And by December the 15th, it would change the story again and keep extending until such a time they become like a dictatorial or an authoritarian leader. Senegal is hope for democracy, that the people choice can stand with the institution backing those choices. That's why I told you about an institution earlier. The military in Senegal refused to intervene. The Constitutional Court stood on his decision that the election must hold. But will that happen elsewhere in West Africa? We will learn, we continue to learn, and use Senegal as reference point as we go ahead.
Well, Austin, I can tell you that I still have quite a number of questions, but we're totally out of time. So I have to say thank you for coming on Hard Copy.
Thank you very much.
I know that this is a conversation that will certainly be ongoing for a while. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's the program tonight, but your thoughts are welcome to the handles showing on the screen in front of you. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Good night.